when the shadows came alive. Hook, 5 lines the city never sleeps, but that night it held its breath. Something moved in the darkness, faster than the eye could follow. Entire teams vanished without a sound. The only witness spoke of shadows that swallowed men whole. The Avengers were busy, so they sent Captain America. The rain was relentless, hammering the rooftops of New York like a war drum. Steve Rogers stood on the edge of a high-rise, his shield strapped to his arm, scanning the streets below. Neon signs flickered in the wet night, their reflections rippling in the puddles. For weeks, the city had been haunted by disappearances. Not muggings, not gang violence. Whole groups, SWAT teams, rescue crews, even a subway car full of passengers, gone without a trace. The only clue was the security footage, a flicker in the corner of the frame, a ripple in the darkness, and then static. Steve had seen the footage. He didn't believe in ghosts. But whatever this was, it wasn't human. A police scanner crackled in his earpiece. Unit 4, we've got movement in the East River subway tunnels. Possible suspect sighting. Steve didn't wait. He leapt from the rooftop, shield raised, landing in the alley below with a splash. The streets were empty, the rain masking his footsteps as he made his way to the nearest subway entrance. The tunnels were colder than the streets above. Water dripped from the ceiling, echoing in the darkness. His boots splashed through shallow puddles as he moved deeper, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the gloom. Then he saw it. At the far end of the tunnel, the darkness shifted. Not like a shadow cast by light. This was a shadow that moved on its own. It stretched along the wall, twisting, curling, until it formed the vague shape of a man. Steve froze. The shadow turned its head toward him. It didn't have eyes, but he felt it looking at him. Then it lunged. The thing moved faster than anything he'd ever seen, gliding across the floor like smoke. Steve raised his shield, the impact rattling his arm. The shadow recoiled, then split into 2 smaller shapes that darted around him. He swung the shield, but it passed through them like mist. They reformed behind him, their shapes elongating into claws. Steve backed toward the wall, scanning for an opening. The shadows circled, their movements eerily coordinated. Then, from deeper in the tunnel, a voice spoke. "Welcome, soldier." The shadows froze. From the darkness stepped a figure, tall, robed, his face hidden beneath a hood. As he drew closer, Steve saw the truth. The skin was gray and cracked, the eyes glowing faint green. The robes were black and gold, tattered but regal, and in one hand he held a staff topped with a skull. "I know you," Steve said. "You're the necromancer." The figure smiled, revealing teeth like broken glass. "You fought my dead before, but these are older, stronger. They are the Army of Shadows." The shadows around them rippled, their forms multiplying until the tunnel was full of them. "You can't fight what you can't touch," the necromancer said. "And soon, you won't even see them coming." The shadows attacked. Steve moved fast, his shield deflecting blows that came from every direction. The air was cold, the light from his flashlight dimming as if the shadows were drinking it in. He fought his way toward the necromancer, but the figure simply stepped back, letting the army close in. A claw raked across his shoulder, the cold burning like ice. Another slammed into his chest, knocking him to the ground. The shadows swarmed, their forms pressing down, smothering him. Then, as suddenly as they'd attacked, they stopped. The necromancer raised his staff, and the shadows melted into the walls. "Not yet," he said. "I want you to see what's coming." He turned and walked into the darkness, his voice echoing. "When the last light dies, the world will belong to me." Steve staggered to his feet, his breath ragged. He knew he couldn't face this alone. The next morning, he found the old man. They met in a small, dusty bookstore in the Lower East Side. The old man was already waiting, leaning on his staff, his eyes sharp despite his age. "You've seen them," he said. Steve nodded. "Shadows. They move like they're alive. The necromancer's controlling them." The old man's expression darkened. "The Army of Shadows is older than he is. They were born in the first darkness, before the sun rose. They can't be killed by steel or fire. Only light, pure light, can destroy them." "What kind of light?" Steve asked. The light of the first flame, the old man said. A relic kept in a fortress buried beneath the Arctic ice. Bring it here, and you can burn his army out of existence. Steve didn't hesitate. Tell me how to find it. That night, he prepared for the journey. The Arctic was hostile enough without an army of shadows hunting him. He packed light, shield, cold weather gear, climbing tools, and enough supplies to last a week. But as he left the city, he felt it, the cold brush of something moving just out of sight. The shadows were following him. He boarded a military transport bound for the Arctic, the engines roaring as the city lights faded behind him. Outside the window, the night was endless. Somewhere in that darkness, the necromancer was watching. Ending cliffhanger. Far below the clouds, in the tunnels beneath the city, the necromancer stood before a wall of shifting black. The shadows writhed, whispering in a language older than man. Follow him, the necromancer said, and when he finds the flame, bring it to me. The shadows slid into the cracks in the stone, vanishing into the earth. The hunt had begun. Fortress beneath the ice. The Arctic wind cut like knives. Captain America stepped off the transport plane into a world of white and silence, the horizon swallowed by endless snow. The cold bit through his gear instantly, but he pushed forward. The coordinates from the old man burned into his mind. Somewhere beneath this frozen wasteland lay the fortress and the light of the first flame. The journey was brutal. The snow was knee-deep, the wind howled without pause, and the temperature dropped so low that his breath froze on his mask. He moved across the ice fields for hours, guided only by a flickering GPS signal and the faint outline of jagged cliffs in the distance. By nightfall, he reached them. The cliffs rose like black teeth from snow, their surfaces slick with ice. At their base, half buried in a drift, was a stone archway carved with symbols he didn't recognize. The entrance was sealed by a slab of ice, so thick it looked like glass. He planted his shield into the snow and struck the ice with all his strength. Cracks spiderwebbed across its surface, and with a second blow, it shattered. Cold air rushed out from the darkness beyond, carrying with it a faint, unnatural heat. Inside, the walls were carved from black stone, the floor slick with frost. The air was heavy, almost humid, and the deeper he went, the more the temperature rose. The sound of the wind faded until there was only silence, and then, faintly, the sound of footsteps. He stopped. From the shadows ahead, a figure emerged. It was tall, armored in black steel, its face hidden behind a mask shaped like a snarling beast. In its hands was a massive axe, the blade etched with glowing runes. The Guardian moved without a word, swinging the axe in a deadly arc Steve blocked with his shield, the impact ringing through the corridor. The force drove him back, boots scraping against the ice. The Guardian pressed forward, each strike heavier than the last. Steve ducked under a swing and slammed his shield into the Guardian's chest. The blow staggered it, but it didn't fall. Instead, it roared, a sound that shook the walls, and charged again. The fight was relentless. The Guardian's armor deflected most of his blows, and its strength was inhuman. Steve had to use the environment, dodging so the axe struck the walls, sending shards of stone flying. Finally, he caught the Guardian off balance, driving his shield into its knee and following with a crushing blow to the head. The mask cracked, and the figure collapsed, unmoving. He pressed on. The corridor opened into a vast chamber. At its center was a brazier, and within it burned a flame unlike any he had seen. White and pure, casting no smoke, its light filling the room with a strange warmth. The light of the first flame. As he approached, the shadows in the corners of the chamber shifted. They peeled away from the walls, forming into human shapes, the Army of Shadows. They moved slowly at first, then faster, gliding across the floor toward him. Steve grabbed the brazier's handle, lifting it from its pedestal. The moment the flame left its resting place, the shadows screamed, their forms twisting in pain. He swung the brazier toward them, and the light seared their bodies, burning holes through the darkness. They fell back, but more poured in from the corridors. He fought his way out, the flame in one hand, his shield in the other, the light cutting through the shadows like a blade. The fortress shook as he reached the entrance. The wind roared back into his ears, snow whipping across his face. He stepped into the storm, the flames' glow casting long beams into the night. Far away, in the tunnels beneath New York, the necromancer felt it. His eyes snapped open, the green light within them flaring. "He has it," he whispered. And then he smiled. Shadows in the city. The transport plane touched down just before dawn. Captain America stepped out into the cold air of the military airfield. The crystal lantern containing the light of the first flame strapped securely to his back. The journey from the Arctic fortress had been brutal, but the relic was his, and with it, a chance to end the necromancer's army of shadows. But the moment his boots hit the tarmac, he knew something was wrong. The air smelled faintly of smoke. In the distance, over the skyline of New York, a column of black rose into the morning sky. Sirens wailed faintly, carried on the wind. A soldier ran up to him, breathless. "Sir, it's the city. They're here." Steve's jaw tightened. "The shadows." The soldier nodded. "They came out of nowhere. Whole blocks are dark. Power's out. People are disappearing in broad daylight." Within the hour, Steve was in the heart of Manhattan. The streets were chaos, cars abandoned, windows shattered, the air thick with the smell of burning. But the strangest thing was the light. Even though the sun was up, whole sections of the city were cloaked in unnatural darkness, as if the shadows themselves had swallowed the daylight. He moved through the streets, shield ready, the lantern's white flame casting a halo around him. The darkness recoiled from it, but he could feel the necromancer's presence pressing in from all sides. A scream cut through the air. Steve sprinted toward it, turning a corner to find a group of civilians backed against a wall, surrounded by shadow figures. They were taller than before, their forms sharper, more defined, almost human, but with faces that shifted and melted like smoke. He charged, swinging the lantern in one hand and his shield in the other. The white light seared the shadows, tearing holes through their bodies. They hissed and retreated, melting into the cracks of the street. "Go!" he shouted to the civilians. They ran, disappearing into the maze of alleys. The battle spread. The army of shadows was everywhere, in the subways, in the alleys, even crawling up the sides of skyscrapers. Steve fought street by street, the lantern's flame keeping the darkness at bay. But for every shadow he burned away, more appeared. Then he heard it, the necromancer's voice, echoing through the city like a whisper in every ear. "You brought me the flame, soldier. Now I'll take it from you." The ground beneath him cracked, and a wave of shadows erupted upward, forming into monstrous shapes. Wolves with eyes like green fire, serpents made of smoke, and towering humanoid figures with claws like scythes. Steve fought like a man possessed, the shield flashing, the lantern blazing. But the creatures pressed harder, forcing him back toward Times Square. When he reached it, he stopped cold. The necromancer was there. He stood atop the wreckage of a bus, his shadow form towering, his robes whipping in an invisible wind. The green light in his eyes burned brighter than ever. Around him, the shadows swirled like a living storm. "You can't win," the necromancer said. "Every time you use the flame, you feed it, and when it burns brightest, it will be mine." Steve tightened his grip on the lantern. "Over my dead body." The necromancer's grin widened. "That can be arranged." The fight was unlike anything Steve had faced. The necromancer moved like smoke, his strikes passing through the shield only to reform behind him. The shadows attacked in waves, forcing Steve to split his focus between defending himself and protecting the flame. He realized the necromancer wasn't trying to kill him. Not yet. He was trying to separate him from the lantern. Steve changed tactics. Instead of holding his ground, he began to move, weaving through the streets, forcing the necromancer to follow. The chase tore through the city, the army of shadows flooding after them. Finally, Steve ducked into an abandoned skyscraper. The interior was pitch black, the only light coming from the lantern. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time, the necromancer's laughter echoing behind him. At the top, he burst onto the roof. The city stretched out below, the pockets of darkness spreading like ink in water. The necromancer emerged from the stairwell, his form solidifying in the daylight. "This ends now," Steve said. The necromancer lunged, and the two collided in a blur of steel and shadow. Steve swung the lantern like a weapon, the white flame flaring with each strike. The necromancer hissed, his form flickering, but he didn't fall. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, the necromancer's hand closed around the lantern. The flame flared violently, the light spilling across the rooftop. Steve grabbed for it, but the necromancer's grip was like iron. "You've done well, soldier," the necromancer said, his voice low. "You brought me exactly what I needed." The flame's light began to dim, as if being pulled into the necromancer's body. The green in his eyes flared brighter, and the shadows around them surged upward, blotting out the sun. Steve drove his shield into the necromancer's chest, breaking his grip. The lantern tumbled across the roof, its light flickering. Both men dove for it. Their hands closed on it at the same time. The world went white. The city of dying light. The white flash faded slowly, leaving Captain America on his knees, gasping for breath. The rooftop was silent except for the distant wail of sirens. The lantern lay between him and the necromancer, its flame flickering weakly, as if it had been wounded. The necromancer rose first. His shadow form was unstable now, parts of his body shifting between smoke and solid flesh. But his eyes burned brighter than ever. "You felt it, didn't you?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. "The flame is mine to claim. You can't protect it forever." Steve pushed himself to his feet, shield raised. "I don't need forever. I just need long enough to end you." The necromancer's grin widened. "Then let's see how long you last." He raised his staff, and the sky above the city darkened. The sun dimmed as if swallowed by an eclipse, and the shadows on the streets below began to move. They stretched, twisted, and rose into the forms of soldiers, beasts, and horrors that had no name. The Army of Shadows had returned, and this time they were everywhere. Steve grabbed the lantern and leapt from the rooftop, landing hard on the street below. The white flame flared, pushing the nearest shadows back, but they regrouped instantly, circling him like wolves. He fought his way through them, shield smashing, flame burning, but the horde was endless. He ducked into an alley, using the narrow space to funnel the attackers. The light seared them, but for every one that dissolved, two more emerged from the walls. The necromancer's laughter echoed from somewhere above, carried on the wind. Steve knew he couldn't win this fight here. He needed to regroup, to find higher ground, somewhere the flame's light could reach farther. He sprinted toward the East River, the shadows chasing him like a living tide. On the waterfront, he found what he was looking for, an old suspension bridge, its towers rising high above the city. If he could get the flame up there, maybe he could push the darkness back far enough to buy time. He climbed fast, the lantern swinging from his belt, the shield strapped to his back. Below, the shadows swarmed onto the bridge, their forms crawling up the cables like insects. Halfway up, one of them reached him, a massive, humanoid shape with claws like scythes. It slashed at him, the blow glancing off his shield and nearly knocking him from the tower. Steve countered with a kick, sending the creature tumbling into the darkness below. He reached the top and set the lantern down. The white flame flared, casting beams of light across the city. The darkness recoiled, retreating from the streets, the rooftops, the alleys. For a moment, it seemed to work. Then the necromancer appeared. He rose from the shadows at the base of the tower, his form stretching upward until he stood level with Steve. His body was a swirling mass of black smoke and bone, his crown of twisted metal gleaming in the dim light. "You think height will save you?" he hissed. "Light falls. Shadows climb." He lashed out, a tendril of darkness whipping toward the lantern. Steve intercepted it with his shield, the impact rattling his bones. The necromancer struck again, and again, each blow heavier than the last. Steve fought back, swinging the lantern like a weapon, the flame's light burning holes through the necromancer's form. But the sorcerer was relentless, his attacks coming faster, his voice a constant hiss in Steve's mind. You can't hold it. You can't hold me. The battle raged across the tower, the two of them trading blows in a deadly dance of light and shadow. Below, the army of shadows surged onto the bridge, their forms writhing and twisting as they climbed. Steve knew he couldn't keep this up. The necromancer was too strong here, too close to the flame. He needed to change the battlefield. With a sudden burst of strength, he slammed his shield into the necromancer's chest, driving him back. Then he grabbed the lantern and leapt from the tower, the wind roaring in his ears as he fell toward the bridge deck. He landed hard, rolling to his feet just as the shadows closed in. The flame flared, pushing them back, but the necromancer was already descending, his form spilling down the tower like a waterfall of darkness. Steve ran. He sprinted across the bridge, the lantern's light cutting a path through the horde. The necromancer followed, his voice echoing through the steel and stone. Run, soldier. Run until the light dies. At the far end of the bridge, Steve ducked into the streets, weaving through the chaos. The city was a war zone now, pockets of light where the flame had touched, surrounded by seas of darkness. He made it to a safe house, a reinforced building lit by floodlights powered by generators. Inside, a handful of survivors huddled together, their faces pale. Among them was the old man. You brought the flame, the old man said, relief in his voice. Yeah, Steve said, setting the lantern on the table. But he's coming for it, and I don't know how much longer I can keep him back. The old man's expression hardened. Then it's time you learn the truth. The flame can destroy the army of shadows, but to kill the necromancer, you'll need to take it to the place where he was born. Where's that? Steve asked. The old man met his eyes. Beneath the city, in the heart of the first darkness. Outside, the wind shifted. The shadows on the walls began to move. The necromancer had found them. The heart of the first darkness. The safe house walls trembled as the shadows pressed against them, their forms writhing like living smoke. The floodlights outside flickered, the generators straining under the necromancer's assault. Inside, the survivors clutched each other, their faces pale in the dim light. Captain America stood at the center of the room, the lantern's white flame casting a protective circle around them. The old man's words still rang in his ears. To kill the necromancer, you must take the flame to the place where he was born, the heart of the first darkness. How do I get there? Steve asked. The old man's eyes were grim. There's an entrance beneath the city, older than the subway, older than the streets. It was buried centuries ago, but the necromancer's power has opened it again. You'll find it in the ruins of the old cathedral. Steve nodded once. Then that's where I'm going. The streets were a war zone. The army of shadows moved like a tide, pouring through alleys and over rooftops, their forms twisting in the dim light. Steve fought his way through them, the lantern's flame burning holes in their ranks, his shield smashing through those that got too close. The cathedral loomed ahead, its spire broken, its stained glass shattered. The front doors hung open, the darkness inside thicker than night. He stepped through, the sound of his boots echoing in the vast, empty space. The pews were overturned, the altar cracked. At the far end, where the floor had collapsed, a staircase spiraled down into blackness. The air grew colder as he descended. The walls were slick with moisture, the stone worn smooth by centuries. The whispers began faintly, then grew louder, a chorus of voices speaking in a language he didn't understand. At the bottom, the tunnel opened into a cavern so vast he couldn't see the ceiling. In the center stood a massive black archway, its surface carved with runes that pulsed with green light. Beyond it was nothing, not darkness, but the absence of everything. The necromancer was waiting. He stepped from the archway, his form more solid than Steve had ever seen it. His robes were gone, replaced by armor of black steel, his crown of twisted metal gleaming in the green light. The army of shadows lined the cavern walls, silent and still. You've brought the flame, the necromancer said, his voice echoing unnaturally. And you've brought it to me. Steve set the lantern on the ground, the white flame flaring. I brought it to end you. The necromancer laughed, the sound like breaking glass. You think light can kill me here? This is my birthplace, my throne, my grave, and yours. The army of shadows surged forward. Steve met them head-on, the flames light burning through their ranks, his shield smashing into those that got too close. But for every shadow that fell, another took its place. The necromancer moved through the chaos like a phantom, striking from every angle. His blows were heavy, his claws leaving trails of green fire in the air. Steve blocked, countered, and pressed forward, forcing the sorcerer back toward the archway. The closer they got, the more the air seemed to tear. The archway pulsed, the green light spilling into the cavern, the whispers growing into a roar. Steve realized the truth. The archway wasn't just the necromancer's birthplace. It was his anchor. His power flowed from whatever lay beyond it. He grabbed the lantern and charged. The necromancer struck, claws raking across his armor, but Steve didn't stop. He slammed the lantern into the base of the archway. The white flame exploded outward, colliding with the green light. The cavern shook violently, the army of shadows screaming as their forms unraveled. The necromancer roared, his body flickering between solid and smoke. "You can't kill me," he shouted. "I'm the first darkness." Steve stepped forward, the flame's light wrapping around him like armor. "Then I'll be the last light you ever see." He drove his shield into the necromancer's chest, forcing him back into the archway. The white flame surged, engulfing them both. The explosion was silent. The green light vanished, the whispers cut off. The army of shadows dissolved into nothing. The archway cracked, then collapsed, the stones falling into the void beyond. When the dust settled, Steve stood alone in the cavern. The lantern lay at his feet, its flame dim but still burning. The necromancer was gone, not bound, not banished, but destroyed. He picked up the lantern and began the long climb back to the surface. The city was quiet when he emerged. The darkness had lifted, the streets empty except for the debris of the battle. The survivors stepped out of hiding, blinking in the sunlight. The old man was waiting at the cathedral steps. "It's done," he asked. Steve nodded. "It's done." The old man smiled faintly. "Then the world owes you a debt it can never repay." Steve looked out over the city. "Let's just hope it never has to."